The Willamette River surged through the night rain carrying secrets the city tried not to see. Ryan Walker, a former Navy SEAL in his 40s, broad-shouldered, weathered, his beard threaded with gray, had learned to live quietly after war. Then a thin, desperate cry tore through the wind. As he moved closer to the riverbank, his breath caught 3 German shepherd puppies. Their fur-soaked and bodies shaking were fighting the icy current clearly thrown there only moments before. If you believe one moment of compassion can change everything, subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us why hope still matters. Rain slid over Portland in thin, persistent sheets, turning the Willamette River into a moving mirror of steel and shadow. Ryan Walker stood beneath the east span of the Hawthorne Bridge collar, pulled high breath steady in a way that came from years of learning how not to panic. He was 43, tall and broad-shouldered, with the compact strength of someone who had spent most of his adult life carrying weight that wasn't optional. His face was sharply cut, high cheekbones, a squared jaw, softened by a short, carefully kept beard threaded with early gray. The rain darkened his cropped brown hair, plastering it to a scar above his left temple, a thin white line from a blast long ago that had rewritten his sense of time. Ryan moved through the world quietly now. People who knew him described him as calm, distant, polite to a fault. What they didn't see was how his stillness came from practice, how chaos had once been his daily language, and silence was something he earned. He had not planned to stop at the river that night. He had planned to walk until the noise in his head softened, until the memories that rose uninvited sandstorms, radio static, the weight of responsibility lost their edge. The city smelled of wet concrete and diesel, the kind of scent that reminded him that life continued whether he felt ready for it or not. Then he heard it. At first the sound blended with the rain and traffic, a thin broken yelp that could have been metal on metal or a gull arguing with the wind. Ryan stopped. His shoulders tensed, a reflex left over from patrols where hesitation had cost lives. He listened again. The sound came from below, from the river itself. He moved closer to the railing and leaned out, peering through the rain-blurred darkness. That was when he saw them. 3 small shapes tumbled in the current, barely visible between streaks of reflected streetlight. German shepherd puppies, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old, were fighting water far too cold and fast for bodies that young. Their coats, black and tan, were slicked flat against their ribs, making them look smaller, more fragile than they should have been. One pup paddled clumsily, mouth opening and closing in silent panic. Another spun helplessly, legs striking nothing solid. The third lagged behind its movements, weaker eyes wide and glassy with exhaustion. Ryan's chest tightened in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. This was the moment before action, the breath held before a door was kicked in, before someone shouted his name through a headset. He scanned the bridge automatically, noting the absence of witnesses, the slick angle of the embankment, the speed of the water. Someone had thrown them. The conclusion arrived fully formed without drama. No accidental fall put 3 puppies in the same stretch of river at the same time. Anger flared hot and sharp, but Ryan forced it down. Anger wasted time. He stripped off his jacket, fingers precise despite the cold biting into his skin. His body remembered what to do even as his mind replayed old warnings: hypothermia, strong current, low visibility. He ignored them. He had ignored worse. As he climbed down the concrete slope, his boots slipped, sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. For a split second an image flashed: another river, another night, another choice made too late. His jaw tightened. Not this time. He entered the water, hard shock, ripping the air from his lungs. The cold was brutal, seizing muscles, but he welcomed it. Pain was honest. Pain kept him present. He reached the nearest puppy first, scooping the trembling body against his chest. The pup let out a thin cry, then stilled, pressed against the unfamiliar warmth. Ryan passed it up onto a low ledge and turned back without hesitation. The second puppy fought him, tiny paws scrabbling at his arms, fear giving it a surprising strength. "Easy," he murmured, his voice rough, unused to being spoken aloud. "I've got you." The words were as much for himself as for the animal. He secured the pup and moved again, heart pounding harder now. The third puppy was farther out, caught near a bridge pillar where the current twisted violently. Its head dipped under, once, twice. Ryan's pulse roared in his ears. He wrapped one arm around the concrete support, stretching the other toward the struggling shape, rain blinding him, water dragging at his legs. This was the edge, the place where training ended, and will took over. His fingers closed around wet fur, felt a faint, frantic heartbeat. He pulled muscles, screaming, until the puppy was against him, alive. When Ryan finally hauled himself back onto the embankment, the three puppies lay huddled together, shaking, breathing real. He dropped to his knees beside them, rain and river water dripping from his beard, and for the first time in years, the noise in his head went quiet. He didn't know yet what would come next. He only knew that something had been pulled back from the river and something inside him had followed. Ryan Walker wrapped his arms around the three shivering bodies and felt the delayed tremor hit him. Not fear exactly, but the aftershock of responsibility settling into place. The rain had eased into a mist, the kind that clung rather than fell, and the Willamette River slid past as if nothing remarkable had happened. The puppies pressed together instinctively, their small ribs fluttering beneath soaked fur, each breath shallow but stubbornly present. Ryan shrugged out of his thermal shirt and wrapped it around them, his hands steady in a way that surprised him. In combat, steadiness had meant survival. Here it meant gentleness, a skill he hadn't practiced in years. As he lifted them, he noticed details he hadn't allowed himself to see before. The largest pup had a bold blaze of tan above one eye and a stubborn set to its jaw, already pushing its nose into Ryan's wrist as if claiming it. The second was leaner ears too big for its head, eyes sharp and restless even in exhaustion. The smallest lagged behind its back legs, trembling head tucked low, breathing uneven but determined. Ryan's mind cataloged these things automatically, the way it used to catalog exits and threats, but now the inventory felt different, protective instead of tactical. He carried them up the embankment and flagged down a passing car, a battered gray Subaru that slowed reluctantly before stopping. The driver was a woman in her early 30s, pale-skinned with chestnut hair pulled into a messy knot and tired eyes that softened instantly at the sight of the puppies. Her name was Emily Carter. She introduced herself quickly, voice calm but alert, the way people sounded when they were used to emergencies. Emily worked as a veterinary technician at an overnight animal clinic across the river, a job that had taught her to balance compassion with efficiency. She was medium height, slim, but strong hands marked by faint scratches and healed bites, evidence of animals that had trusted her just enough. "They need warmth and fluids now," she said after a brief assessment, her fingers gentle but precise as she checked gums and heartbeats, especially the smallest one. Ryan nodded without hesitation. He placed the puppies carefully on the back seat as Emily cranked the heat. The car smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. As they drove, Ryan sat twisted toward the back, one hand resting lightly on the pile of fur, grounding himself in the rise and fall of breathing. Emily watched him in the rearview mirror, noting the way his posture never fully relaxed, how his eyes tracked everything even when he was still. She didn't ask questions yet. At the clinic, fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting the world in pale clarity. The puppies were whisked inside, wrapped in warm towels, their small forms suddenly fragile against stainless steel and white walls. Emily moved with practiced confidence, directing a junior assistant with cropped hair and a quiet demeanor. Marcus, a college student barely old enough to shave, whose nervous energy softened when given clear instructions. Ryan stood back, hands shoved into his pockets, feeling strangely out of place. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. He noticed his fingers shaking and clenched them until they stopped. Emily returned, wiping her hands on a towel, her expression cautiously optimistic. "They're going to make it," she said. "They're tougher than they look." The words landed heavier than she could have known. Ryan exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between relief and something like grief. He leaned against the wall, eyes closing for a moment too long. Emily watched him, recognizing the signs of someone who had run on purpose for too long. You saved them, she added quietly. That matters. Ryan opened his eyes. The clinic hallway blurred for a second, not with tears but with memory. He thought of names etched into metal, of calls unanswered. I just didn't want them to disappear, he said, voice rough. Emily nodded. She understood that too. Later, when the puppies were stable and sleeping in a heated enclosure, Ryan stood before the glass, studying them as if committing proof to memory. The bold one had already curled protectively around the smallest chin resting on its back. The restless one slept with twitching paws, dreaming of something it refused to give up. Ryan felt a decision forming, not loud or dramatic, but solid. He didn't know where it would lead, only that walking away felt impossible. Outside, the river continued its endless movement, but inside the clinic 3 small lives rested, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give realized the night was not finished with him yet. Morning arrived without ceremony. A pale gray light filtering through the clinic windows as Portland stretched awake, unaware of the small turning point that had occurred overnight. Ryan Walker sat in a molded plastic chair outside the recovery room, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped as if holding something fragile he could not see. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the river returned, not violent now, but patient, endless, reminding him that some things kept moving, no matter how carefully you tried to leave them behind. The puppies lay inside the enclosure behind glass, their breathing, deeper, steadier bodies arranged in an unconscious pact of warmth. In the clearer light, Ryan could see them better. The bold one's tan markings were sharper than he'd thought, eyes dark and intelligent even in sleep. The lean, restless pup twitched occasionally, ears flicking at sounds only it could hear. The smallest had been cleaned and shaved slightly around an IV line, its ribs still visible, but no longer frighteningly so. Emily Carter moved quietly between rooms, her sneakers whispering against linoleum. In daylight she looked younger than Ryan had first guessed, freckles scattered across her nose, skin pale but healthy, posture straight without being rigid. She carried herself with a grounded confidence that came from repetition, thousands of small lives steadied by her hands. She stopped beside Ryan and offered him a paper cup of coffee, black, already cooled. They made it through the night, she said simply. Ryan accepted the cup, nodding once. Thank you, he replied, though the words felt insufficient. He had said thank you to medics before, to chaplains, to strangers who had helped him stand when his legs wouldn't cooperate. Gratitude, he had learned, did not always ease the weight that followed survival. A man in a Navy windbreaker entered the clinic shortly after, rain still clinging to his sleeves. His name was Daniel Brooks, an animal control officer in his early 50s, tall and spare with iron-gray hair cropped close, and a face lined by long hours spent negotiating between policy and compassion. He spoke softly, eyes attentive, and when he shook Ryan's hand, his grip was firm but measured. Daniel listened as Emily explained the situation, nodding, asking precise questions. They'll need temporary placement once they're cleared, he said. We can arrange foster care, but space is tight right now. Ryan felt the words land like a test. He stared at the puppies through the glass, watching the smallest shift closer to the others. Temporary. Foster. Language built for passing through, not staying. He had lived most of his adult life like that, on rotation, on assignment, never long enough anywhere to leave a mark that couldn't be erased. Emily glanced at him, reading the hesitation in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. She didn't push. Daniel followed her gaze and raised an eyebrow slightly. You the one who pulled them out? He asked Ryan. Ryan nodded. Yeah. Daniel studied him for a moment, the scar at his temple, the careful stillness, the quiet vigilance. They usually bond fast to the first steady presence they have, Daniel said, especially after trauma. The word trauma sat heavy in the air. Ryan swallowed. He thought of the way the bold pup had pressed into his wrist, the way the smallest had gone still against his chest, trusting warmth without knowing its source. What happens if I... He paused, unaccustomed to asking for permission. If I keep them, at least for now. Emily's face softened, though her tone remained professional. "We'd need to check your living situation," she said, "and they'll require follow-up care. Feeding every few hours, monitoring temperature, physical therapy for the smallest one." Ryan nodded again. Tasks made sense. Tasks were familiar. Daniel smiled faintly. "We can do a provisional placement," he said. "Short term. See how it goes." Short term again. Ryan looked down at his hands, then back at the puppies. He realized something quietly unsettling. The idea of short term no longer felt like relief. It felt like loss, prearranged. Later, as Emily showed him how to hold a bottle, how to support a fragile jaw, Ryan felt the puppies respond to him, instinctive, unguarded. The smallest struggled, then latched on, swallowing with fierce concentration. Ryan felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with pain. Outside, traffic hummed, the river kept its course, and the city went on. Inside the clinic, a man who had trained himself to leave learned for the first time what it meant to consider staying. Ryan Walker's apartment sat on the third floor of a brick building near southeast Belmont. Modest and orderly, the kind of place chosen for its quiet, rather than its charm. Morning light slipped through narrow windows and settled on clean surfaces, a folded blanket on the couch. Boots aligned by the door. Photographs face down on a shelf. The air smelled faintly of cedar cleaner and coffee grounds. Ryan moved through the space with a careful deliberation, shoulders slightly hunched as if he expected the walls to ask something of him. He had carried the puppies up the stairs in a cardboard carrier lined with towels, feeling their small weights shift and press together with each step. Inside, he set the carrier down and knelt, letting them orient themselves. They were stronger now, eyes, brighter movements, clumsier, but determined. The bold pup, still the largest, planted its paws wide and surveyed the room as if measuring it. Its coat had dried into a rough sheen, black saddle pronounced against tan legs, ears beginning to hint at their future rise. The restless one darted forward, nose-twitching, tail wagging in uneven bursts, already testing the boundaries of unfamiliar smells. The smallest moved, last cautious hind legs still stiff, but improving gaze lifting to Ryan's face with a searching intensity that made his throat tighten. Ryan had followed Emily Carter's instructions to the letter, temperature-checked feeding schedule pinned to the fridge, medications laid out with military neatness. Tasks calmed him. What unsettled him was the way the apartment changed around the puppies, how the silence he had cultivated fractured into small sounds, nails ticking on hardwood. Soft sneezes, the rhythmic pull of breathing that anchored the room to the present. He watched them explore, noticing how the bold pup placed itself between the smallest and the door, how the restless one kept circling back to Ryan's boots, as if counting him among the furniture it refused to lose. A knock came mid-morning, brisk but not intrusive. Ryan opened the door to Daniel Brooks, the animal control officer, clipboard tucked under one arm. In daylight, Daniel's lined face looked kinder than it had under fluorescent clinic lights. Gray eyes, steady posture, relaxed in a way that came from years of being both authority and witness. He stepped inside, shoes off without being asked, and crouched to observe the puppies. "They're settling," he said, voice low. "That's a good sign." Ryan nodded. He felt exposed, as if his life were being audited. Daniel asked practical questions, space-time commitment, and listened to the answers without judgment. Before leaving, he paused. "Temporary doesn't have to mean careless," he said. "Just honest." After Daniel left, Ryan sat on the floor back against the couch, letting the puppies crawl over him. The smallest attempted to climb his chest, slipping and trying again, stubborn in a way that felt familiar. Ryan supported the effort with 2 fingers, steadying without lifting. He thought of balance, of how much help counted as rescue and how much as interference. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived with a crate and supplies. Her hair pulled back in a loose braid, freckles bright against flushed skin from the cold. She wore jeans and a soft jacket that smelled faintly of soap and antiseptic. Her presence filled the room without crowding it. She knelt, greeted the puppies by touch rather than voice, and smiled at their response. "You're doing well," she told Ryan, not as praise, but as confirmation. He surprised himself by asking her to stay for coffee. They spoke quietly about feeding techniques, about nights when sleep came in fragments. Emily noticed the photographs turned face down and didn't ask. Ryan noticed the way she listened with her whole body, chin tipped forward, hands still. When evening fell, the puppies grew restless, hunger and fatigue tugging them apart and back together. Ryan followed the routine bottle by bottle, wiping muzzles, murmuring without thinking. The bold pup finished first and sat back satisfied. The restless one tried to steal another's share. The smallest drank slowly, pausing to breathe, eyes fixed on Ryan, as if memorizing him. When they finally slept, 3 small bodies arranged in a clumsy crescent, Ryan remained on the floor, the weight of staying pressing in. It was not fear he felt, but the unfamiliar gravity of being needed tomorrow. Outside, the city hummed and the river kept moving. Inside, a house learned new names, and a man who had mastered departure learned the first discipline of belonging. Spring arrived quietly, not as warmth but as permission, the light lingering a little longer in Ryan Walker's apartment each evening, as if time itself had decided to slow down. The puppies were no longer small enough to disappear into the crook of his arm. Their legs had strengthened, their coats thickened into healthy shine, and their personalities, once shaped by survival, now unfolded with confidence. Ryan stood at the window one morning, coffee cooling in his hand, watching them wrestle across the rug. The bold one moved with assured dominance, shoulders squared, already protective without knowing why. The restless one sprinted in joyful bursts, skidding into furniture with clumsy enthusiasm, ears half lifted, eyes bright with curiosity. The smallest, no longer small in the way that frightened him, rose carefully, favoring nothing, now moving with a quiet attentiveness that made Ryan think of patience learned early. Ryan himself had changed in ways he did not announce. His beard was fuller, less carefully trimmed, his posture less guarded. The apartment no longer felt like a temporary shelter between departures. It smelled faintly of kibble and clean laundry, of mornings that had purpose. When Daniel Brooks returned for a scheduled check, clipboard exchanged for a relaxed smile, he paused just inside the doorway. "They look like they belong," he said, his gray eyes taking in the scene. Daniel had spent decades seeing endings that were necessary but rarely joyful. His own hairline had retreated early. His shoulders carried the slope of long responsibility, yet he retained a quiet humor that softened hard truths. He reviewed the paperwork, watched the puppies respond to Ryan's voice, and nodded once. "Permanent adoption is an option," he said, "if you're ready." The word permanent landed gently, no longer sharp. Ryan surprised himself by smiling without restraint. Emily Carter arrived later that afternoon with news from the clinic. She had exchanged her work jacket for a soft sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, freckles catching the light. She moved easily now in Ryan's space, comfortable without familiarity, turning careless. "They're cleared," she said, setting down a folder. "Strong hearts, good joints. Even the youngest one is ahead of where we hoped." Ryan listened, hands resting on the puppies' backs, feeling steady warmth. Emily watched him closely, noting the way his eyes softened when he looked at them, the way he spoke without commands. "You did this," she added, not out of flattery but recognition. That evening they took the puppies to the river again, not to the bridge, but to a grassy stretch downstream where the water slowed and widened. The sun dipped low, turning the Willamette into copper and glass. Ryan unclipped the leashes and let the puppies explore their paws, tentative at first, then sure. The bold one stood at the edge, chest out, assessing the water as if measuring an old rival. The restless one splashed immediately, barking at ripples. The quiet one sat beside Ryan, leaning into his leg, content to watch. Ryan crouched, fingers brushing the grass, and felt a weight lift that he had carried for years without naming. He thought of nights defined by orders and exits, of the discipline of leaving before attachment could form. He thought of how staying had felt heavier at first, then lighter with practice. Emily stood nearby, arms folded loosely, smiling at the dogs. "Have you named them yet?" she asked. Ryan considered. Names mattered. Names stayed. Bear, he said, nodding to the bold one. Shadow for the restless blur that refused distance. Echo for the quiet presence that reflected more than it demanded. The puppies responded as if they had been waiting. Bear looked back, tail lifting. Shadow spun. Echo pressed closer. As the light faded, Ryan clipped the leashes again and felt no urge to rush home or away. The river moved on unchanged, but he was not the same man who had stood on its edge weeks before. He had learned that rescue did not always end at the waterline, that healing could be mutual, and that joy did not require forgetting the past, only choosing to live beside it. When they returned to the apartment, the puppies curled together, full and tired. Ryan turned off the light, leaving the room warm and breathing. For the first time in a long while, tomorrow felt like a promise rather than a threat. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes it is a quiet moment when a heart chooses to stay instead of walking away. 3 small lives pulled from a river became a doorway through it. A broken man remembered how to hope and love, found a place to rest. Perhaps this is how God works most often, not by changing the world all at once, but by placing something fragile in our path and asking what we will do next. In our daily lives, we all stand beside our own rivers, moments when it would be easier to look away, to keep walking, to tell ourselves it is not our responsibility. Yet again and again, grace whispers that compassion is never wasted. When we choose kindness, even in small ways, we become part of a larger story of healing, one written not only by our hands, but guided by God's unseen care. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it so its light can reach someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or what this story meant to you. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe in stories that heal, protect, and remind us we are not alone, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them together. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you in every unseen struggle. May your heart stay open to miracles, especially the quiet ones.